Yeah, a quick run through what happened with them, because I think what happened with the men's shed movement is of some interest. So if you go to the next, whoever's pushing the buttons, the next slide. I won't read through all of this, but basically there's no right way in terms of men's sheds. It's really what the participants in the community decides. And it's not the destination, it's not building the shed that's important, it's actually the creative journey. Very importantly, it works because men are empowered. They're equal participants. And I think some of the approaches previously, including through men's health forums, has been to treat people like customers or clients or patients or students. And I think that way tends to patronise people. And I think that's really, really important. Feel free, anyone, to jump in at any point, but that's my starting point. So, yeah, the next slide. Thanks. Yeah, back one. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure how to push buttons. That's the one I want. Thank you. So this gives you some idea of how it's grown. It's 27 years since the first shed in Goolwa. It's around 22 years since the first men's shed in Tongala. And as you probably know, they've now spread to 7 nations big time around the world. And the fastest recent growth has been in England, Scotland, the US. Some of you may have seen my book about the men's shed movement. So next slide. There's a whole range of parallels. As you probably know, there's movements start in small ways and often transfer across nations. And I've put up a couple of examples of, go back to that one, yeah, the parallels between other movements. And these are movements that started elsewhere in Australia, mostly elsewhere in Australia, which actually spread to this nation. So I think we have to recognise that the men's shed movement is one of Australia's gifts to the rest of the world. Next slide. So this is the first shed in Goolwa in 1993. That's what it looks like pretty much today. And the little tag on the shed that you can barely read actually just says "The Shed." This was the prototype for what was to come. Next one. There was a number of things happening in the mid-1950s which are documented here. And so it's not that the shed caused stuff on its own. It was the fact that other things were actually happening at the time. There was ABC TV documentaries. There was John Williamson singing about the shed. Mark Thompson was writing about stories in the shed. There was a gerontologist got involved. And so there was a whole range of things that really came together to make this work. Next one. So there was a few sheds copied by different people, mainly in South Australia. This one in Hackham West in South Australia. Next one. Some of them, as you can see, this one's in the in rural South Australia. Some of them started to link with health services and also Vietnam veterans organisations. This one started in 2001, so this one is 19 years old now, near Yorktown. Next one. There were also links with the Vietnam veterans. This is an ex-military rehabilitation complex. And again, you can see it had an organisation called The Shed. That was all they were called. Next, please. And of course, they then spread into New South Wales. This one's from Nambucca Valley in 2000. Next one. This is the first men's shed in the world, which opened in July of 1998. And this is the late Dick McGowan's wife in 2015, and she still participates in that shed 22 years later. Next one. And that's the Tongala men's shed today, opened as the Dick McGowan men's shed in 98. Thank you. So without going into any great detail, they started to spring up. These are sheds that were open, a dozen sheds that were open in Australia before 2012. So this is 18 years ago. You can see them mostly in South Australia, but they're starting to spread to Victoria, New South Wales, Western Australia, Tasmania. Next one. You'll notice in these early sheds that there was none in Queensland. There was one in Western Australia, but they actually came to Queensland and Western Australia almost a decade later than in other states. Next one. The Alzheimer's South Australia, Keith Bettany identified there was a way of doing stuff through shed-like stuff in aged care settings. I think this is an important one to talk about maybe. Next one. We'll jump through that one too. This one's in Western Australia. Next one. This is an RAAF Vietnam veteran shed, which was operated out of a garage. Next one. This is one of the early men's sheds in Western Australia, the Freeman Shed, which is a very influential shed and had a lot to do with men's mental health and well-being from really early times, and was a pioneer in Western Australia. Next one. Then conferences started to happen. This is one of the ways that the whole thing was cemented by men's sheds actually linking with communities. And Muckenbudden is an absolutely tiny community in the wheat belt of Western Australia. So the important thing is they're actually decentered sheds. They were many kilometres from anywhere, and yet they were able to run conferences bottom up. So this was a very powerful image, this one. If you have a look, you've got a carpet placed over a train line between the men's shed and the hotel in this tiny town in Western Australia, with the marquee set up, and 300 participants came from all over Australia. So it was a very powerful movement at a grassroots level. And this is one of the reasons why it worked. It wasn't coming top down, it was coming bottom up. And even the conferences run bottom up, like this one in Muckenbudden. Next one. This one's near where I live in Ballarat. It's and you can see the imagery. It's about a shed, it's about tools, but it's also about friendship and doing stuff together, enjoying stuff. And this is a really unusual shed because they actually took out a loan of $250,000 and bought their own shed outright. And they've since paid that money back. So this is an example of people doing it for themselves. They wanted to be independent of government, and they are. They now own their shed outright. And this gives people freedom to basically develop it as they wish. It also means it's hard work, but that's the extent of the commitment. I'm just showing you the level of support it's got at a very local level. Next one. Then it became internationalised. The picture here has got representatives from Ireland, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the UK. The one on the left-hand side is a conference in Brisbane. The one on the right-hand side is a conference in the UK. And so it started to grow internationally, particularly grew very quickly in Ireland, and very recently in the UK. Next one. And of course, they've grown exceptionally well in Ireland. There's now 450 men's sheds right across Ireland. And they are seriously in every little tiny town. You would not believe. If you got a shotgun and fired at a map of Ireland, that's where the sheds are. They are seriously everywhere. They're not based just in Dublin or in Belfast. They are seriously everywhere. And that's one of the reasons. It's just an indication of how much traction they've got. Next one. Here's an example of sheds which have actually developed on the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And in some of these sheds, men were killing each other as recently as 30 years ago. And now they're working side by side, cutting across Protestant Catholic divides in places like Belfast and on the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. So there's just an indication of the power of the movement. Next one. Yeah, I'll skip over this one. I could tell a story, but we're short of time.
Barry, just before we go through to finish off in Ireland, we've got a question here. Why do you think there's a take-up in Ireland was so big?
It was largely as a result of, well, A, because it had good leadership, and B, because there was the global financial crisis of 2008. And the first shed opened in 2009. And there was a hell of a lot of men out of work in Ireland at that time. The other reason it worked is they have a very strong bottom-up community development ethos we don't have in Australia.
No, perfect. That's all right. Yeah, it was just a quick one that was there. And I guess coming out of COVID, that could be very handy information for anyone that's on the list. So back to the...
No, absolutely. And I think it's an important question. And it comes up in the slides which follow on the end of this, perfect, where I'm basically saying that I think there's an opportunity post-COVID for some of this stuff to have even more traction, because there's a lot of people, including a lot of men, who will be out of work for the rest of their lives, who are in the shed demographic between 50 and 60 years old. The median age in Ireland is actually 10 years younger than in Australia, because it was kick-started during the global financial crisis, whereas the median age in Australia is around 70 years at the moment. Okay. Next one. Next slide. Yeah, these are just pictures of sheds in Ireland, Scotland. You can keep going.
Yeah.
Some in New Zealand. And here's shed density. This is the number of sheds per 100,000 population. And what's tended to happen is they've grown in most places reasonably organically. And you'll notice the number of sheds per 100,000 population seems to even out around 5 or 6 per 100,000. Given that, I anticipate that within a few years, within 5 years, there might be 2,000 sheds across the UK. And and this is a big if they grow in the same way as they have in other countries, there might be a similar number or even more in the US. Yeah. But there's a lot of ifs there. But they've grown very quickly and very organically to a point now. There's actually more than this in New Zealand, as this is 2018. But they tend to get to a point where there's between sort of 5, 6, 7 sheds per 100,000 people. And if you want to know how many sheds there might be if it develops in the same way, you do the maths. Next. So I've quickly gone through the history, and these last 4 slides are just me as a researcher and adult educator. I'm not a men's health expert, but I think a lot of people don't acknowledge that literacy falls away with age. And I don't know whether everyone's ever looked at this, but there's actually health literacy statistics available for many countries. Is anybody aware of health literacy as a concept?
I'm not. I've got a couple of people saying no. So if you'd like to elaborate on it.
Yeah, okay. So literacy and health literacy are different, but they are, when you look at the stats, they're actually pretty similar. Literacy and health literacy are almost the same. Literacy is about the ability to read a phone book, to read and understand the instructions on a medicine bottle, the ability to read a train timetable, the ability to read and understand an article in the Australian press. These are what we call functional literacies. So health literacy is an ability to basically understand stuff well enough to be able to look after yourself and read medicine bottles and all that sort of stuff. And basically it falls away with age. So I'm a 70-year-old man. At my age, 70% of Australian men are functionally illiterate. And they're also functionally health illiterate, which means that 70% of men age 70 aren't literate enough to stay well and healthy. Now, a lot of educated men, like myself and probably many of the people who are in this forum, can't believe this. But the statistics show that it's actually very high. And so basically, although it's not a perfect linear relationship, at age 50, around 50% of Australian men are functionally illiterate. At age 60, it's around 60%. At age 70, it's 70%. And interestingly, men who are older than me aren't surveyed because they're not regarded as being literate enough to fill out a survey. No one has ever surveyed Australian men over 70. And for me, this is an incredible statistic. And my point is that we use the internet and we use literature and we think people can read and understand. And the fact is, and can I just say, it's not just men, it's men and women who are functionally literate. And so whatever we do in the men's health space, we have to acknowledge that our message will not get through to a lot of men. Does anybody make a comment?
Anyone?
Sorry, Larry, I just have said it on the chat. It's the case with my story about the window cleaner that I gave when you were coming late. You know, just makes me really get it and know how to talk to my new mate Damien. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and I'll just go on. My second point on this slide is that connectivity with the internet, information and computer technology connectivity and skills are much lower than average in older, rural and lower socioeconomic status men. So if you go to a small rural community, it's very likely that 2/3 of the men in that community won't have access to the internet. And yet we've got governments who are putting stuff online and withdrawing services on the assumption that people have got access. So my point is that older men are very unlikely to be able to access or sign up to anything online. I'm not dumbing people down, I'm just saying this is the reality. And my other point, that the service provision else.
May I ask a question?
Yes, yes.
Hey, Bob.
Thank you. That research is startling, shocking, and saddening all at the same time. Question then, I'm a foreigner, I'm not from here, but is that something to address in the men's shed that through construction, through coming together, brotherhood, or whatever it is, music or building something, that's a viable road to change? And would the men's shed address that? I mean, this is shocking.
Look, it's a good question, Bob. The answer is that yes, that's what happens, because if you actually create a community of practice where everybody works together, it doesn't matter that some people can't read or write or can't get on the internet. They can get the information from other people, you know?
And we've always done that.
Yeah, and if you work as a team, it deals with those systemic issues. Can I just say that obviously you're in the US by the sound of it?
Yes, but they just gave me a pandemic visa here, so I may never leave.
Look, I think the stats that I've got, I mean, that the survey that I'm talking about is actually done internationally. I think only 3 nations in the world actually survey their 70-year-olds, and Australia is one of them. US is not one of them. I'm assuming, Bob, that you're over 60.
We are the same age, Barry.
Well, you're 10 years too old to survey in America.
Between you and I, we're 140 years old, Barry.
Well, exactly. But my point is that here is a glaring inconsistency. You and I don't matter in terms of literacy.
We don't matter anyways. No.
Okay.
Well,
Can I, sorry, Barry, Barry and Bob, can I just chime in on that in terms of people that are on the group as well, on all the participants with that in probably the wider prospect of the last couple of days is that it's important to know your target demographic when you're doing something, because this is what highlights to me massively. My background's in business, so I'm focused on it, is that it's about getting results. So understanding your target demographic and best way to contact them. Because I know someone maybe from my generation that might go, let's, first thing to do when launching something like the Men's Shed, let's sign everyone up to an email database, or let's Zoom call them. But if you actually understand the barriers to getting to your participants, you can overcome them more strategically, have the discussion. So.
Yeah, and look, it's a real issue, and the more gendered and racialised the demographic is, whether that be in America or Australia. You go into a lot of Aboriginal communities, or you go into a lot of Black communities in the US, and what I've described will be very similar.
Yeah.
I'd like to go on to the next slide.
Yeah, give me one.
I'd love to ask a question later.
Is that the slide, Barry?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just providing a caveat before I go into the next stuff, because some of the stuff I've got to say is fairly confronting. And I'm just saying, I was asked to give answers to grow from one group to 100 or a movement. And my observation is I don't have the answers to grow from one group to 100 to a movement, but I have got some ideas. So not answers, just ideas. Next slide.
Before we go to that, Barry, as well, and I'll get Glenn to touch base with you on this after, but just if we can have the stats that you represented for those over 50s and 70s, we've just got someone that's after that. So I'll touch base with that on the outside.
Yeah, no problems. If you send that to me, I can give you, it's basically, it's an adult literacy international survey.
Yeah,
but
perfect.
I can send that to you later. And the stats are available. You can break it down by all sorts of things.
No problem.
So I reflected on the question, how do you grow from one to a movement? I mean, some of these are obvious, some of them aren't obvious. My first point is you build from successful grassroots. You empower participants at a local level, and you acknowledge the power and benefit of communities of practice. By communities of practice, I'm saying people doing stuff together and learning from each other, as Bob said. And my most important point in the men's health space would be not to patronise. I go to conferences, I go to things as an academic, I go to government forums, and they talk about clients, they talk about customers, they talk about patients, and in learning contexts, they talk about students. And with respect, this stuff is bullshit. It's stuff that might work for professionals, but it doesn't work for people because it patronises. And the most important thing and the biggest benefit that you can bring to people, including men, is from active and a positive connection and participation, not information or shame about health problems or deficit. And the notion of health problem or deficit is, and some of these problems come from the movement itself, from the men's health movement, which sees men as a problem. And I acknowledge that there are problems if you look at it from a particular way, but it's not the men who are the problems. In many ways, it's the provision of services that is the problem. And the services don't match the needs of men.
Yeah.
And I can't stress that enough. There's nothing wrong with old men. There's something wrong with the services. And there's something wrong with the assumptions we make about deficit. And there's no doubt that men my age and older have got health problems. But, we should be able to find ways of addressing those issues without talking about deficit.
No, it's definitely a powerful comment.
Yeah, next one. I think, and to take your point, I think, Sean, as you said before, that the men you most need to attract are those less likely to see or respond to an online message. So in a sense, online is systemically, is just the wrong way on its own. That's not to say that some men won't get online messages and respond, but they're not the men you want. The men you want are the men who won't be able to respond to the message. And I think I'll go to the third point on this slide, is that missionary approaches from reformed men or experts are likely to turn men off.
Can you explain a bit more on that one?
A missionary approach is for me saying, I'm a born again men's health person, and I know the answers, and I'm a good example as a reformed man, now an expert, who can help you fix your life. And those sort of missionary approaches from reformed men are as likely to turn men off as to turn men on.
Do you feel that that's, I guess, how would you feel that? But it seems to me from the point that you had previous was that that seems to be like you're talking at men, and the guys that were on for last, rather than talking with men in that terms.
Yes, I think you have to start from where men are. And that's why the men's shed movement works, because it doesn't prescribe what men should be like. It doesn't even say what should happen in a shed. It says men's shed. That's all it says. If it's in Cobram, it's called the Cobram men's shed. If it's in El Paso in America, it's called the El Paso men's shed. It doesn't say what happens. It just says it's a place for men to go. And for that reason, it works, because if you actually called a shed a men's health shed, men would not come.
Yep.
If you called it a men's anti-suicide shed, they won't come. It's about making the place somewhere where people feel like they can be encouraged to participate without necessarily formally signing up. Can I just say, I looked online at I was sent a list of links that I went and had a look at, which have been initiatives which have come from the men's health movement. I was about a dozen of them. They were sent to me by Glenn. I looked at every one of them, and the images and the messages in those, all of those online links were not inclusive of or attractive to the diversity amongst men. There were no black men.
Yeah.
There were no men with the seat hanging out of their pants. They were all men who were sitting around a table, who were educated, literate. And the images I saw were of privileged white males. And that's wrong.
No, definitely. Yep.
It's not going to work. And so when I looked at it, I thought, you want my opinion, and I know this is confronting, but I'm saying to you that the images and messages have to be inclusive of and attractive to diversity amongst men. You need rural men, you need older men, you need young men like yourself in your hat, and it's good to see you in your hat. That's the sort of image you need to be inclusive of men, not just older, educated men.
No, that's a great point, yeah.
And my last point on that slide is the top-down health information and exhortations are less effective than local, informal, shared experience. Now, how you actually do it, because I'm not knocking you guys. You guys are concerned about your own health. You're concerned about other men's health. You want to do something. You want to create a movement. You want to create change. You and I share a desire to ensure that other men aren't committing suicide and are looking after themselves, etc., etc., etc. But, you know, top-down health information and exhortations aren't effective. They use up money, and governments like them because they tick boxes and you can show them a website that you've created. But who the fuck is using it? And who's not getting access? And I guess that's something I come to from my own research as an adult educator. The people who come to adult education programs are the people who come in spite of what we do. It's the people who don't come that you want to reach.
Yeah.
And that should be underline what we're doing. And it's I don't have the answers, but I'm saying that we need to find ways of doing that. And doing it using images and messages which aren't inclusive or attractive to the diversity amongst men, including black men and old men and men with a disability. And there's no pictures of men in wheelchairs. There's no pictures of men who are living in poverty. There's no images of young men. It's all middle-aged, educated men, like the people who are creating the material.
Yeah.
And, you know, as a 70-year-old man looking in, I'm saying that's pitched to me, but you don't want to hook me in. You want to hook other people in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, from what I'm getting from that, is that a lot of the people that you've researched is that they're not necessarily depicting their target demographic. They're depicting who they are who they are comfortable with themselves. But yeah, you've got to depict your target demographic, and from that, what you've said to kind of like anyone on the call is wanting to implement stuff. I guess it's pick who your people are, where they are, what they talk about, learn about what I call it the avatar of that person, and then how do you best help them and get to them, rather than how do you feel that you would be targeted.
You're right. I would just change that in one way. Yep. and add the word participate. You have to get the men to participate rather than just being passive receivers of the knowledge. Yep. If you want a movement, the men have to participate in the movement, not just respond to your messages as a marketer or an advertiser.
Yeah.
And so it's about, and I go out of my way not to talk about men who are enrolled or who are patients or customers who are clients. It's the wrong way to think about it. It's about men participating. And I guess that's engaging.
Yeah.
Because engagement leads to And can I just say that it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, I keep going about myself, but I'm an older professional man. And a lot of what I learn, including about my own health and about the health of other men, is through bike riding. And nothing's written down, but it's through sharing an experience with other people and just talking informally. And I think in the end, it's men who are isolated, who don't have access to informal or formal networks, who are most at risk of suicide and isolation in any form. And research has shown in the last few years that isolation is deadly. Full stop.
Yeah, I think, it's loneliness and
the best thing we can do for men's health is to include men in whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. If men are participating, they will share their experience and they will be healthier and better, even without the messaging, even without the experts. In the end, social isolation is deadly, and that's what causes men to become isolated and, in the worst of instances, commit suicide. I'm not a suicide expert, but it's fairly obvious that anyone who's isolated, whether they're 10 or 90, is at risk.
No, definitely. I think, it's good that we've got you on here to, give that advice to everyone there. We've got some people on the chat as well, which are agreeing, and, it seems that it's resonating with them. We do have 8 minutes left for this one. Have you got?
I don't think there's another slide. Just check. Oh yeah, this is
what you've just gone on.
Yeah, this is what I've gone. No, leave this one on the screen.
Yep.
And I thought I'd get to my personal opinion. This is my last slide, and it's the sort of sting in the tail. And some people will get offended, but you've asked my professional opinion, and I would be lying if I wasn't honest.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'm brutally honest.
Go for it.
I'm saying to you, my personal opinion about the current men's health pitch and online imagery is it's not inclusive of the diversity of Australian male population. It's mostly targeted professional, literate, IT-connected, educated, self-motivated men. It looks like a top-down program without local content or connection, and it's focused on random one-off events or gatherings, and it's not going to work.
Yep.
You have to find another way.
No, I think everyone here, you're obviously acknowledged of the whole spectrum, so we'll take your opinion quite well. I know I've taken from it. Is there any questions from that? We've got 6 minutes until the next group, and this has been amazing. So I guess personally, thank you, Barry, for your time. We've got Bob.
Well, can I just stress?
Sorry, go, Barry. Yep.
What I'm saying is not personal. I'm an academic, and I've studied the men's shed movement in intimate detail, and I'm amazed at how successful it's been. But it's successful in its simplicity because it doesn't do the things that are on my screen.
Yeah,
that's why it works.
No, definitely. And Bob, go for it.
You've given us a wonderful roadmap, a successful one of integrating men. If I can just take 1 minute and talk about something here. We have a strange bedfellow who's not here, and her name is Susan Faludi, and she wrote a book called Backlash, which was a seminal book of the women's movement. I mean seminal. It was a pioneering book. She changed her attention to the men's movement. And she wrote a book called Stiffed. Now, she went in with a lot of preconceptions about this, but what she found was that men didn't go to work because of their ego. Men didn't go to work for money. They didn't go to work for status. They went to go to work to contribute, to produce, to belong, and to provide for their families and their communities. It's like in our DNA, and it's also a unifying theme whatever class, whatever income, whatever education. We have that in us. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with you. And I think, can I just say that if you look closely at the nature of the men's shed movement, it looks very much like the feminist movement, but don't tell men that.
No. I'm a student of both. I understand.
And it's very flat. It's a very flat movement.
With that, Barry, we can learn a lot from it. I'll go to Tony next. Sorry, thank you for that, Bob. We'll go to Tony. We just only got a couple of minutes, so quick fire questions for Barry. Go, Tony.
Barry, I met you when you helped to launch Craig Wetjen's Men's Shed Photography Project a while back.
How are you, Tony?
Good, mate. I want to pose the question. We talk about men's sheds. I'm a little bit of a fan of what Craig portrayed in his book, what I call a man cave that we have at our own home. Any kind of comment about the benefits of your own personal man cave compared to participating in a men's shed? Because I think I may have pinched a line from you that I have in my presentations: my place, my space, my sense of identity. Yeah.
Look, it's clear that man caves and individual man caves and community man caves are important for some men, but they can also be pathological and deadly.
As in the isolation thing?
Absolutely.
Yep.
And that men commit suicide in their man caves. Sometimes.
Okay.
And that's the danger, because any situation which leads men to be further isolated can be deadly.
Yep.
And that was picked up very early in the men's shed movement by a psychologist in Adelaide who studied the men's sheds as they were evolving in 1995. And he said, I think this is a really positive thing, but we have to make sure that they are in places where they are open enough for men not to commit suicide. Because he observed as a psychologist that men were often suiciding in their sheds.
Wow.
This is in South Australia in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
I'm not being negative about man caves. I'm just saying that's the danger.
I think with that, Barry, it goes to that once again, that what's the purpose? What are we doing it for? Not a let's go to the end result of, well, everyone man cave, everyone men's shed, everyone online. It's what's the purpose for this person or for this group, and how do we then affect it? I think I've got Alan for a question.
Yeah, I put something in the chat, Sean. There's a guy who comes to our gatherings in Tasmania. He lives in Victoria. He's a retired academic. He's been running a successful pilot in a men's shed somewhere outside Melbourne, I think. And he's talked about it on our conversation list. I haven't dobbed him in by name on the chat, but he is quite passionate about that success of opening up communications and running men's circles in a men's shed. And I've been into 3 or 4 men's sheds here in Hobart, and there's never been much communication. We do. We have men's jokes and, you know, typical men type conversations over the morning tea and biscuits, but it never goes deeper in any of the sheds I've been in. And that's why, Tony, I wish he was on the call here, but you know, he's done stuff, and he's an academic from UWS in Sydney, now in Victoria, trying to do his little bit.
My
So we're going to Barry for this. Yep.
My response, Alan, is that men's circles, whether they be learning circles or health circles or whatever, have been very, how do I put it? They simply haven't worked. We tried learning circles as they do in Sweden. We've tried, the idea of men sitting in a circle talking, just talking, has been spectacularly unsuccessful in Australia. And that's what the research shows. We have to find other ways, which is why the model men's sheds about men doing stuff shoulder to shoulder. Men will talk to each other, but they have to be doing something together rather than just focusing on each other's, looking into each other's eyes in a circle. That doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you said, that's the I guess a summation of some of the things that you've seen. So I think with all of them, and I've got some other people coming up with what they do and how they connect to people. And I think from these discussions, it's great because we're finding that it's very nuanced and it's very complex. And we are at least so everyone's doing something that's helping. I'll have to check in with Glenn. So we've gone to 2:00.
Hey Sean, hey Barry. It's Glenn here. Barry, thank you so much for giving your time. My deep apologies for the mix-up with your time slot. You stepped into it and really embraced the time available, and it sounds like you've made a real contribution to the conversation. Thanks for sharing your insights, and also thanks for your friendly criticisms as well. I really valued it.
And if anybody does want to read into any of this stuff, a list of everything that I've published and also quite a few resources are on my website, which is it's basically barrygoanna.com. You'll find it. There's a website with a whole lot of resources on it.
We have a chat feature here, Barry. We'll make sure that it's dropped into the chat feature. So
I've got that here. If you 1 second.
Perfect. So Sean will do that. So we'll say thanks very much to Barry. You're welcome to stick around a bit if you like and hear some more of the conversation. And if you have to go, we completely understand.